principles for developing indicators, the SMART principle. Try to be as specific as possible. There are indicators that I think the colleagues were working, I think Yugesh and Swiso. I was saying they need to use the SMART principles to assist the branches to develop the indicators. Because there's an indicator that, for example, it says that we will be developing a technical national senior certificate report. That is an indicator. You need to report on that. Yeah, I see Lala noting because it's coming from your branch. So it must be measurable. It must be attainable. There's a situation where you just make a statement. As to how you can measure that, it's problematic. So hence I will be giving you an exercise as a teacher to say, we want to comply with CAPS, that every lesson has to go hand in hand with an exercise. And then it has to be realistic. There is a situation where we also develop indicators that you can't measure it, and then you can't even achieve it at the end of the day. And then it's better to, when you go through the document, the many textbooks on resources or on indicators, they always say, have few indicators that you'll be able to measure them, you'll be able to achieve what you want to measure, than having a whole lot that you won't be able to even have data source for those particular indicators. There must be time bound. You can't have an indicator that is just open. You do not know the health Martin when he was presenting on some of the indicators. It's just open. You never know when are we going to achieve this particular goal or an objective. It must say by 2050, by 2025, this is where we want to see ourselves achieving this, so that you will have milestones along the way towards achieving what you have set for yourself. The World Bank usually talk about the claim of good indicators. To say an indicator should be clear, relevant, economic, adequate, and monitorable. I think it's the same as the SMART principle, because it must be precise and unambiguous. When we first look at the action plan indicators, I think most of us were struggling to figure out what does this mean? And even today, we are still struggling and grappling with the Action 2014 indicators. Some of us, we do not know where to start. For example, I don't know whether we have, Zarin, are you coming from curriculum? Yes. How do we really measure the curriculum coverage? But we have an indicator on the percentage of learners who cover everything in the curriculum in a particular year. So I can tell you it's not a simple indicator to measure. And then hence you need to break it down to make it very clear to say this is what we want to look at based on the CAPS or something like that. It must be relevant. You can't have a program like the National School Nutrition Program, and then you are trying to measure something that is not relevant to nutrition. For example, you start measuring something that has really nothing to do with the learning. You can measure the issue of height, the weight, say our nutritious lunch, making learners obese. You can do that, but you can't measure something that is not really related. For example, you can't measure in the school nutrition program the issue of curriculum coverage. It has nothing to do with it. It must be relevant to what you are dealing with and the objectives of the program. It must be economic. I think this is a challenge where if information is important for us to have, for example, the issue of teacher absenteeism is important, but whenever you want to get information that can cost a lot of money, this is where there's a debate whether, in terms of economic, information is important to the system or to the institution. Do we leave it because we can't afford to collect the information? However, the advice from World Bank is saying it must be economic. You must get it. It must be cost effective. You shouldn't spend a lot of money to get the information, you know, for the indicator. It must be adequate to provide a sufficient basis to assess performance, and then it must be something that is, whenever, for example, in the APP in particular, whenever you put the figure, you must be able to provide evidence, because currently the AG will come to you, or the General will say, I understand, you are saying you have 8 million learners that are benefiting from no fee school. Can I see evidence to say these are the list, these are the schools, and stuff like that? You must be able to provide evidence on a particular indicator that you are providing. You can't just sit down and say, I'm having 8 million learners in the National School Nutrition Program, and then you can't even produce to say, where are the figures to support what you're saying, or you are reporting. Minimum requirements to write a good indicator to say, that's why I was trying to get also the purpose, what do you want to achieve by the measure that you have given us. So basically, you know, it should have a name that you were doing. You must define it to say. Sometimes you can just put a measure, and then without us having, you know, a definition of what you want, what do you really mean by the curriculum coverage in particular. You know, to say of the 10 topics that are in the syllabus, we want learners to have covered at least 9. That is what we mean by the curriculum coverage, for example. And you must indicate how are you going to calculate that particular indicator. Of course, if it's a number, it's a number. However, we need to be very careful in terms of the number, reporting in numbers. For example, you can't just say you want to increase the number of learners who are accessing the no fee, who are in the no fee or benefiting from the no fee school policy. You want also to look at who are, you must define for us the number of learners who qualify, so that we can see that of the 9 million learners, you have covered only 7. We know that you still owe us another 2 million. So the numbers as well, you must provide. That's why it's important also to set the target, to say, this is where I'm moving from, or this is where I want to move, so that we can see the distance, you know, towards what you want to achieve. So, but if it's just a number, you know, you don't know what you want to tell us. So basically the definitions as well, it also try to break down on what is that you want to achieve in detail. And the data elements, what are the 2 sets of information that you need to work out your measure, for example. Hence I indicated that it's important to say you have on the number of learners who are benefiting from school nutrition program. You say of the 12 million, there are 10 million learners who are in you know, qualified for the school nutrition program. But so far I'm still at 8. So you will need the total number of learners who are eligible for school nutrition and the number who are already benefiting. For us, we can be able to see and say, okay, by the way, when do you want to cover almost all the learners? So we need 2 sets of data elements. And the source of information, you know, you can get information from the secondary sources, for example, you know, Status A, or any other operational database, the EMIS, you know, there are many, or any written report. You know, I was looking at the POT in the department, the proof of delivery. And we're looking at the learner access to workbooks and textbooks. There's something that is called POT. It's a source of information that you can use to say, this is the proof that the books has been delivered to school A. You know, however, although some data have limitations, but you know, it's a proof to say this is the database to kind of check and provide to anybody to say this is what we have done as a data source that you can use. So it is important to also think about that. However, I think whenever you're developing an indicator, you can't be limited by saying we don't have, there are some indicators that do not currently have a means of collecting information. Sometimes you can develop indicators simultaneously with thinking on how you can source that particular information. So it's not always to wait for the source information to be available and then you start collecting or developing an indicator. You can do it, you know, otherwise simultaneously. And then some of the indicators, they push us to do some action regarding how we're going to collect that. So, but we shouldn't put ourselves in a corner where you develop many indicators, you don't even have a source of how you're going to collect the information. I think it has been a situation with us now with most of the indicators, around 16 indicators in the action plan. But we try to put measures in place to ensure that the information is, because it's useful. That's, you know, the information that we need is very useful. However, we don't have means of, you know, or source of that particular indicators. But we are working towards that for a system to respond to the indicators. And I'm saying, you know, don't be limited when you are working with indicators about the source of information. But it's very much important.
So coming to source of information, we had a meeting with the AG concerning the indicator which is talking about the number of learners fed through distance schooling.
And basically, I just want to, I will try to give you this as I'm about to finish. That, you know, this is, for example, you can define the gender parity index, you know, ratio of female to males of a given indicator. The purpose, you know, is to measure the issue of equity in the schooling system and the formula. Let's go to the formula here, because usually this is where, you know, the gender parity index, I think, is problematic in terms of how do we interpret it. Like I said, we have more males than males. We divide the number of female value of a given indicator is either looking at the GR or then net enrollment rate by that of male indicator value, either GR or any R. For example, what you do when you are measuring the gender parity index, you look at the population only of girls. Of girls, how many of the 100 girls? How many of 100 girls are attending educational institution? And then you get that 95% of them are attending educational institution. Of 100 boys as well. Or let me say of 80 boys that we are having. Of these 80 boys, how many of 80 boys are attending? And you find that there are 50 or 60. And then you take that figure, the percentage, let me say 95%, and let me say 99% of boys who are attending. And then you work out all the gender parity index. You don't take 100 of the 100 girls, 90 are going. You don't take 90 and you divide it by the 70 boys who are attending. You don't do that. You must work out the values separately, and then you divide those values that you get afterwards, so that you get the gender parity index. That's how you calculate it. You know, people usually ask this indicator to say, how do we calculate it? Because we are having, you know, more females compared to males. I don't know, do you get this one on the gender parity index? Okay.
The question is, why is it like that?
Right. Let me quickly try that. Sorry, I've been thinking about it. It's an interesting way of getting around the problem. As you say, you know, there aren't equal numbers of boys and girls within each age group. So let's take a very extreme example. In an area, you have 90 girls and only 10 boys. Okay. Then if half the girls were attending, 45, and half the boys, you're doing equally well in terms of boys and girls. So the ratio should be 1. But what you're going to get is 45 to 5. So you're going to get a ratio of 9 to 1 if you don't do it this way. So usually because it's close to half, it doesn't matter all that much if you simply take the numbers of girls and the numbers of boys and compare them and express it as a ratio, express the girls as a ratio of the boys. But when you have deviations from the 50%, this adjusts for it automatically, because in those in the GER or the NER, you've already got the proportion or the numbers in the population.
Yeah. I think what Carlos was doing yesterday. You know, for example, if a test is out of 40, another one is out of 60, so you take them to 100% so that you can see, you know, in terms of percentages, rather than looking at the actual numbers as well. That's where you can do comparison based on that, you know, and then look at between maybe school A and B who performed better. I think it's also related to that as well. So I think this is some of the figures that I said. Let me just share with you that we always, calculated the report as the department to say in the primary gender parity index is that we are having more. If you look at the RSA here, we are having more. If it's 0.996 or it's below parity. Parity is when the figure is 1. That's why I said interpretation is very much important, particularly this one. Any figure that is below 1, then it means that we are having more males than females who are at primary level. So if it's 1.1, 1.01, 1.02, or 1.11, or 1.20, it means we are having more, by far, we are having more females by far if it's 1.20, for example. So if it's 0.8880, it means by far we are having more females in the system than the females. When it's 1, it means that we are having almost, equal number of females are likely to be attending educational institutions. So that's where the parity has been achieved. So this variation, in provinces as well. For example, in Gauteng, you can see that we are having more, almost equal, the number or percentage of females and who are likely to be attending educational institutions, and then the others are around 0.94. In secondary gender parity index, we are having more, or nationally we are having more females who are attending secondary level than the males. The question here is that what is causing this? That we are having more males in primary and few females or girl learners in primary, compared to where in secondary where we have more females than males. What is happening? So there are many things. That is where we get the services of professor to also do more research on this. However, maybe one can just indicate that whenever we are questioned on this one, we always indicate that is that more girls are passing, are progressing more than the males. They are repeating. Males are repeating. I think I can see when they are really appreciating. So, but the other thing, when you look at the literature, there's a caution to say, do we celebrate when we have, for example, where we have more female learners in school compared to males? Do we celebrate? Whatever. If for example, for example, before we know that previously we used to have more males in schools than girls, do we celebrate?
Yes.
So there's a danger that when we are celebrating, it may mean that most of the boys are dropping out of the school, are not accessing, which is also a problem. So that is something that you need, whenever you are interpreting this, I know, from Neil's side and Nosipo, you will be celebrating Bolala and them. You will be celebrating that.
Particularly, if I may just add, we've got a problem in the Northern Cape and the Western Cape. You'll see that the primary ratios are close to the South African ratios. But if you look at the secondary ratios, they're much below the South African rate. And that is because a lot of boys drop out relatively early in those two provinces. And it's particularly a problem amongst the coloured population, which is that one finds dropping out at age 15 is very common, much more so than amongst other population groups. And that gives us these ratios that deviate from the.
So basically that's why I say whenever you look at this figure,
yeah,
there are many things that you can make out of this. To say what could be the possible, why is it only happening in Northwest, Northern Cape, So it is about maybe the gender unit as well to also do some sort of small scale. So what could be the problem in the particular area where you find this kind of problem?
I think we're looking at one sector of education, but maybe if you've got the helicopter view, where are these boys going? Crime is going up. The last you know, jails are overflowing, all those
Yeah.
things, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So there are many factors, but you know, without really having research, you know, we can't conclude, because you know the information that you get. You remember? I remember the time that we were sitting with the NGOs. They said, no, you guys, you don't know. And we said, which area are you operating? They are operating in a particular area, and then you find that that problem is happening in one area. You know, but it can't be a problem that is everywhere. So hence, you need also to make follow-up. You know, this figure, it tells you something to say, you need to do something. I can tell you whenever we present this figure to the parliamentarians, they always ask, why is that like that? And then particularly, you know, I nearly said African ministers. We once presented this to, you know, our counterparts from other African countries. And they said, no, in their countries, you find that throughout, in all levels of education, primary, secondary, you know, is way far below 1. So because there are more males than, you know, most females are not attending school at all. Somewhere is 0.80. So basically you find that there's a very big gap. But when they see this, they are so surprised, say, why, what is happening? So basically I'm saying, you know, this figure can tell you a lot of things. So yeah, so let me just finish by looking at the issue about adjusted. That Olivia, when she was, you know, presenting, she was talking about the NER and the, you know, the net intake rate, NIR. So basically, you know, our engagement with, I think in your handout, I've given you the age admission policy there. If you look at it, you will realize that since 2004, there's been a challenge where a parent took the department to court, constitutional court, to say, my child is 5 years and my child is very bright. He can count, he can read, he can do anything. Should I keep my child at home whilst he can do this instead of going to grade 1? And then, you know, the child, you know, the parent was given, you know, a permission to register the child. That has happened then to say to all children, if a parent feels that my child is 5 years, turning 6 before June, then the child can be admitted. When we raised this problem, you know, we agreed with UIS, you know, that we need to use another measure, which is adjusted. Primary net enrollment rate, for example. It can be adjusted secondary net enrollment rate. So, but when you look at this, maybe, you know, one can just say, here it should be, yeah, it should be 7 to 13. So what happens in the adjusted primary net enrollment rate? You look at the only learners who are 7 years old to 13 years old, because they are supposed to be in primary. So you may find that of these 7 to 13, 12 years old, you know, might be already in grade 8. So in terms of the net enrollment rate, you don't count any child who is, whether the child is attending, you don't count that child. You should look at only learners in grade 1 up to grade 7. That is about the net enrollment rate. So in terms of adjusted, you look at all learners who are 7 to 13. Whether they are in secondary or primary, you must count them, so long as they are attending educational institutions. That's the difference between the two. That's the adjusted and net enrollment rate. So in South Africa, we opted to report on the adjusted net enrollment rate, to say we are having more learners who are 13 years old who are already in secondary, so or in grade 8. So in terms of the NER, you shouldn't count them, because you must look at grade 1 to 7, only the primary level. So hence we use the adjusted. And then they say these are the figures to say in South Africa, when you look at the 7 to 13 who are in, you know, you must lose the population of the 7 to 13 as well. We get that in 2002 we had approximately 97%, and then in 2011, this information is coming from the General House Survey. We are standing at almost 19%. Only 1% of learners are out of school. And whenever we present this, they always say, how many learners or children are we talking about? This 1%. We can celebrate to say 1% is nothing, but we're talking about over 110 learners, children, 110,000 who are still out of school. So it's a point of that we are worried as well. So there's a breakdown, you know, by province as well. so I want, this is the same as the net enrollment rate, sorry, net intake rate. It looks at the number of learners who are starting grade 1. So if we are having, in 2012, we want to look at, of the 7 years old that was expecting to be studying grade 1, how many of them are studying grade 1? So basically you can find that almost 40% or 60%, that means I think it's around 60% of 7 years old who are studying grade 1. However, there are also other 7 years old who are already in grade 2 and grade 3. So what do you do with those other learners? So in terms of the net intake rate, you ignore that. But our engagement, we concluded that we must use adjusted to say, regardless of whether the learner is studying grade 1, we want to see of the 7 years old, how many are attending, are in school, and then we divide by the total number of 7 years old, and then we get the figure. Because otherwise it will be a skewed kind of information that you send out to say, it seems as 40% of 7 years old are still out of school, and whilst it's not the case. So hence we put everybody under adjusted. So, and the age-specific enrollment rate as well, we look at the 7 to 15 is the compulsory band, we know, and we are almost 99% as well. So I will finish up with this out of school to say these are the figures, to say that's why I was saying between 7 to 15, we are almost having 111,000 learners who are out of school. And then from 16, what Professor was saying, from 16 to 18, that's where we are having a big problem. We are having over 490,000 of 16 to 18 who are out of school. And when you break this down by province, you realize Western Cape is where the main problem is of the 16 to 18. And you must break this down again by the disaggregation, by population group, which shows that the most colored 16 to 18 children are out of school.
How do you trace
them? Come again?
How do you trace them? How do you track them?
From the data, when we do the analysis. That's why I said you start with the overall figure, you come to the province, you go to the population group, you can go to gender. But that's how the general allows you up to that level. The census, with the census data, we can even go to the district, municipality districts, and we go into the smallest areas, except the EAs, we can go to that level. So I think on that note, this is where the lecture ends today. Thank you.